In the name of God who creates, redeems, and sustains us. Amen. The congregation at St. Peter's Beverly, where I served as rector, can tell you that whenever we encounter a reading like today's, a disjointed mess of a gospel reading, if ever there was one, I would go off on a rant about the people who put the lectionary together. It would go something like this. Let's just chop up the gospel into snippets, leave out crucial elements, make it into non sequiturs, and then jam it all together and make it look like the author mixed up his pages of the text when he was putting it together. Our reading today is a case in point. If you were listening closely or reading along, you probably noticed the story jumps around a little. Hint, if you noticed the verses at the top, you'll notice that they skipped a big chunk in the middle. And there's a significant gap between the start and the finish of the reading. Because in 1 minute, they're in a boat going to a place, then they go ashore and they're helping people, and the next thing you know, they're in the boat again, and they get to a place and they're helping people. What happened in between? Well, I'll tell you in a minute. Our friends, the disciples, have returned from the mission that Jesus sent them on. The one we heard about 2 weeks ago before we had the little sidetrack into the life and death of John the Baptizer. They're excited because they've been successful. They've preached the word and they've healed people, and they're just like their mentor. Golden thing, they could do it. They came back thrilled and also exhausted. After all, preaching and healing is hard work. And so Jesus says, well, yeah, we need to go to a quiet place. You need a little R&R, a little rest, a little time to unwind, to relax, to eat, to take it easy. And so they get in the boat and they head off. But Jesus and the 12 have done their work too well, because people see them in the boat, they recognize them and start following them along the shore to see where they're going. And when they get where they're going, the crowd is already there. And Mark says, he began to teach them many things. Then suddenly they're back in the boat again. If it sounds disjointed, that's because we've left something out. The lectionary folks, in their wisdom, cut out 2 episodes that happened there. The first is, after Jesus finishes teaching them many things, he feeds them. A vast multitude are fed with loaves and fishes. You remember that story. And then he sends the disciples on in the boat, and he goes off to pray. And later on that night, they see him walking on the water, and they think he's a ghost. But it's him, and he gets in the boat and says, okay, let's go on to Gennesaret. So, our good friends who put the lectionary together said, okay, feeding 5,000, there's a Sunday lecture or sermon right there. And walking on water, hey, there's another one. So why don't we just cut it all up, and this one will be one theme, and that'll be another, and then the one after that'll be another one. So, as I want to say, they, as usual, know best. And here we are, working with what we have. But what we do get this week, and this is good, is a double helping of Jesus dealing with the huge crowds. The huge crowds that assemble wherever he goes. And he heals them, both by touching them and by being touched, by having his clothing touched. And there's an overarching theme here. The disciples, who are now called apostles by Mark. This is a first, because it literally means in Greek those who are sent. And Jesus has sent them forth, and they were successful, and now they have come back. Well, he has compassion on them, and there is the key. They need some rest, and he wants to take them away to a quiet place for a while. And they set out to do just that. Yet there's no rest and there's no relaxation. For the crowds follow them, and Jesus looks upon the crowds and he has compassion for them. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And he ministers to them and he teaches them and instructs them in the ways of the kingdom. And as we know, he also feeds them. In both cases, with his apostles and with all these shepherdless sheep, he has compassion. His heart goes out to them. His message is meant for them, and his love for them is very apparent. This is something that we need to remember because it applies to us as well. Like the 12, we can get exhausted from doing what we do. And the more conveniences that seem to come along, and the more technology is supposed to help us and make life simpler, the busier we seem to get. And then the matter of our children. I seem to remember when I was a kid, I had a lot of downtime when I could just play with my friends, unsupervised. Now, kids have every moment supervised. They're all off playing sports or taking music lessons or in play groups, and they're doing this and they're doing that. They're being chauffeured all over town by one of their parents. And everybody is just totally crazy. We're working constantly, even when we think we're resting. This is why Jesus so stresses they've got to stop. They've got to take a break. Even God took the Sabbath after creating everything. We are called to do no less. The necessity of rest is critical if we're going to carry on with the work that Jesus would have us do. After all, if God rests, we're mere mortals. We must really need to rest. And yet Jesus finds it harder and harder to get away. And he doesn't shrink from addressing the crowd, healing the sick, the vast numbers that seek him. There's very little room for rest for them either. And yet both of these things remain so essential. Jesus wants our well-being and knows how hard it can be to get it and to do all these things that occupy our time. It's an important thing to remember because our faith is not about division, and it's not about separating us from others, and it's not about foisting what we perceive as our will on them. It's quite simply about compassion for others, the compassion that Jesus shows time and again, the compassion that the apostles have learned. It's quite simply about treating others the way we would like to be treated, and about having enough compassion for ourselves to rest and to take that Sabbath time. Jesus and his apostles demonstrated no less. Neither, my friends, should we. Amen.